On paper, it looks like a complete monolith of devotion.
Huh.
I mean, if you look at macro surveys from organizations like Pew Research, they tell us that over 80% of the population in Muslim-majority countries like Malaysia and Indonesia report absolute, unwavering compliance with their 5 daily prayers.
Right, you see those statistics and you picture a society just perfectly synchronized by faith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you actually run a localized empirical audit, that whole facade just collapses almost immediately.
It really does.
Yeah. So the renowned Malaysian scholar Dato Dr. Mohd Fadzillah Kamsa, he conducted this landmark nationwide study, and he revealed a staggering 80% noncompliance rate among Malay Muslims.
Which is just a massive reversal of the Pew data.
Completely. We are talking about a reality where only 15% of high school students are successfully completing all 5 daily prayers.
Yeah.
So for the community educators, youth mentors, and religious administrators tuning into this deep dive today, welcome to the ritual compliance gap.
It's a statistical paradox that forces us to completely reevaluate how we understand religious practice in the modern world. I mean, to grasp the sheer gravity of this gap, you really have to understand the theological baseline we're working from here.
Right, the stakes are incredibly high.
Exactly. Within Islamic orthopraxy, Salah is universally conceptualized as the Tiang Agama, the absolute non-negotiable pillar of the religion. It's not, a seasonal event or a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage.
It's a relentless daily temporal commitment.
Yes. So when you have an 80% non-compliance rate in a population that deeply identifies as Muslim, you're looking at a systemic spiritual crisis. And this gap between cognitive belief and physical practice has ignited incredibly fierce theological debates, particularly regarding the concept of qada.
Qada being the legal mandate to make up missed compensatory prayers.
Right.
Because majoritarian scholars in the dominant Shafi'i jurisprudence of Southeast Asia, like Ustad Wadi Anwar, they champion a very strict classical stance on this.
They argue that qada is an absolute legal debt owed to God. Doesn't matter if a person, deliberately abandoned their prayers for a decade during their youth.
That debt mathematically accumulates.
Exactly, and it must be systematically paid back. And that framework transforms this from a passive sociological observation into an active psychological burden.
Because you've got millions of people who identify deeply as Muslim, who believe in the theology, but who are carrying around decades of accumulated, non-negotiable spiritual debt.
The dissonance there is profound. Knowing you owe that debt, but failing to execute the daily ritual to stop it from growing.
So how does a massive population carry that cognitive belief, but fail the execution on such a massive scale? Let's start by looking at the youth. If the belief is fundamentally intact, why are young people missing these prayers?
Well, contemporary social scientists are actually returning to a classical Islamic psychological framework to diagnose this. They use a highly specific vocabulary.
This psychological trio, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. They identify a psychological trio at the root of the crisis: kasal, future, and malal. These terms offer a much sharper diagnostic tool than just saying someone is, distracted.
Let's break those down. So kasal refers to a profound apathy, correct?
Right. The individual possesses the physical capability and the theological knowledge, but they are entirely paralyzed by lethargy. They just delay the ritual until the prescribed time window simply expires.
And then future, on the other hand, is a state of spiritual fatigue.
Yeah, a weakened resolve that's heavily driven by environmental pressures. Under the influence of future, an individual actively prioritizes worldly, academic, or professional achievements over the sacred obligation.
Which really lines up with the empirical data. There's this fascinating case study of Muslim teenagers in Selangor, Malaysia.
Oh, the Selangor study is incredibly revealing.
Right. When researchers asked them why they missed their obligatory prayers, 33.3% cited deliberate or intentional neglect.
Which aligns directly with future, that secular prioritization.
Exactly. And then 26.7% blamed academic busyness.
And 20% directly cited kasal.
That paralyzing laziness. But we also have malal.
Yes, malal is a deep-seated boredom stemming from the perception that the ritual is merely repetitive and monotonous, which just leads to rapid burnout.
And what's wild is that the catalyst supercharging all 3 of these states is the digital crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a generation whose attention spans are being systematically fractured by constant digital stimuli, because prayers like Dur, Asr, and Maghrib have strict, astronomically determined time windows.
So an hour lost to the algorithmic scroll doesn't just mean you're running late?
No, it means you miss the prayer entirely. It induces chronic procrastination, which the classical texts call taswif.
Right, tuswif. It's the constant indefinite delaying of good deeds, and it is weaponized by the modern digital landscape. I mean, social media platforms are fundamentally engineered to destroy temporal awareness.
While the ancient rituals of Salah demands the exact opposite.
Exactly. Salah demands that you're acutely aware of the sun's position, the shifting of shadows, the precise passage of time. The smartphone, however, demands that you lose all concept of time entirely.
It's a direct cognitive conflict between the astronomical clock and the algorithmic feet.
It really is.
But wait, if a 15-year-old is abandoning a foundational religious pillar just to scroll through social media, isn't that a massive indictment of how the ritual was taught in the first place?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Because if the practice shatters that easily under the pressure of an algorithm, the foundation must be incredibly fragile.
The data strongly supports that conclusion. The sources highlight a massive failure in the pedagogical approach, particularly in primary education.
Right.
Studies show that over 91% of young students express a genuine baseline interest in Islamic education.
So the failure isn't in their willingness.
No, it's in the delivery. The teaching methods are overwhelmingly mechanical. They focus strictly on the rote memorization of physical postures and Arabic recitations without providing any tarbiyah.
Tarbiyah being the deep, values-based spiritual and moral nurturing. It's the process of internalizing the why behind the action, rather than just drilling the how.
Exactly. And without tarbiyah, religious education is reduced to a compliance-based physical checklist. It provides absolutely no psychological armor.
So when these kids transition into adolescence, they're suddenly hit with the secularizing forces of mass media, peer pressure, and digital distraction.
And the mechanical habit just dissolves. There was never any intrinsic spiritual appreciation to sustain the discipline when it became inconvenient.
That hollow foundation totally explains why the youth abandon the habit. But what happens when the spirit is completely willing, but the physical architecture of the ritual fundamentally betrays you?
Moving to the elderly.
Right. For the elderly, it's not a crisis of faith or digital distraction. It's a crisis of biomechanics.
Because the execution of Salah requires highly coordinated, rigorous musculoskeletal movements.
The physical demands are relentless.
They really are. You're looking at prolonged, perfectly still standing during Qiyam. You have the precise bowing from the waist during Ruku.
And most demandingly, the deep prostration of sujud.
Right, transitioning all your body weight to the floor and pushing back up.
So there was a 2024 environmental behavioral study that looked exactly at this dynamic among physically frail elderly Muslims. And the statistical findings on localized pain are incredibly revealing.
What did the numbers show?
Thigh and hip pain dramatically lower the ability to execute these movements.
Yeah.
On a specialized scoring system measuring the execution of Salah postures, the mean score dropped from 6.16 for healthy individuals down to 5.08 for those suffering from localized pain.
That's a very significant drop. And the most formidable barrier identified in that data was knee pain.
Yes, knee pain.
The study noted a large statistical effect for knee pain, specifically an ETA squared of 0.12, which is highly substantial in behavioral health metrics.
Wow.
Because knee pain completely breaks the biomechanical chain required to transition from Qiyam down into Sujud.
It physically traps the worshiper.
Exactly, forcing them to abandon the traditional postures and modify the ritual, usually by praying while seated on a chair.
And the psychological fallout of that physical limitation is profound. I mean, the inability to perform the prayer in the traditional communal format often fosters a deep sense of spiritual isolation.
You're physically present in the congregation, but biomechanically detached from the physical synchrony of the worshipers around you.
Though reading through the sources, there's this fascinating irony here.
What's that?
While the physical demands are a massive structural barrier for the frail, for healthy individuals, executing Salah with proper form is actually a highly effective, measurable form of low-impact physical therapy.
Oh, absolutely. A University of Malaya study confirmed it provides genuine cardiovascular, muscular, and joint flexibility benefits. The biomechanics of the ritual are literally designed to keep the human body functioning optimally.
But the moment that baseline physical function begins to slip, the ritual quickly becomes structurally inaccessible. So we see the body becoming a structural barrier. But what happens when the environment itself is the structural barrier?
Like transplanting the ritual into a secular setting.
Exactly. Think about taking this astronomically timed ritual into the rigid machinery of a secular Western environment. Let's look at the diaspora drop, specifically focusing on the friction practicing Muslims face in Australia.
To understand the friction of the diaspora drop, you really have to realize what is being left behind. In a Muslim-majority society, the entire public and temporal infrastructure supports the ritual.
The adhan is broadcast publicly.
Right, establishing the rhythm of the day. Workplaces, shopping centers, public spaces, they all have integrated, dedicated prayer facilities.
But when a Muslim migrates to a country like Australia, they are transitioning into a secular framework that is often completely indifferent, if not occasionally hostile, to that ancient rhythm.
The temporal clash is immediate. A standard corporate workday in Australia runs from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
And that rigid block of time entirely swallows two obligatory prayers, Dhuhr at midday and Oz in the afternoon.
And in the winter months, when the days are short, the extremely narrow window for Maghrib, the sunset prayer, hits right at 5 p.m.
Perfectly colliding with the evening commute.
Exactly. And the practical fiction isn't just finding 5 to 15 minutes for the prayer itself. It is the prerequisite of wudu.
The physical reality of performing wudu in a standard corporate environment creates immense cultural discomfort.
You're attempting to perform the mandatory washing of the face, arms, and feet in a communal office sink while your colleagues are walking in and out.
Yeah, that's incredibly awkward.
Following that, you have to find a space to pray. The sources document practicing Muslims having to retreat to empty conference rooms, storage closets, or quiet corners under stairwells just to fulfill the obligation without drawing unwanted scrutiny.
This is where legal frameworks are supposed to intervene. Yeah. In the state of Victoria, the Equal Opportunity Act 2010 is a robust piece of legislation designed to prohibit discrimination based on religious belief or activity.
And the crucial mechanism in this law is that it imposes a positive duty on employers.
Right. They can't just passively avoid discriminating. They must proactively eliminate discrimination by making reasonable accommodations for religious observance.
In practice, this means if an employee requests a 10-minute break for Azur and there is adequate staff coverage, denying that request violates the positive duty.
Or consider the recruitment process. Scheduling a mandatory critical job interview on a Friday afternoon can constitute indirect discrimination.
Because it forces the candidate to choose between the career opportunity and Jummah, the obligatory Friday congregational prayer.
But the sources make it clear that despite these legal frameworks existing on paper, the lived reality is still fraught with compromise. We see this systemic friction extending right into the educational sector.
Oh, the educational sector is a prime example.
At the tertiary level, consider the massive protests at Monash University's Clayton campus in Melbourne.
Right.
You had an active population of over 260 Muslim students requiring space for daily prayer, but the university had only allocated a room built to accommodate 16 people at a time.
The result? Students were forced to pray outside, exposed to the weather and public scrutiny, just to meet their temporal obligations between classes.
And at the primary and secondary school levels, the situation is incredibly fragmented. The New South Wales Department of Education has guidelines advising schools to provide clean, quiet spaces and appropriate access to water for wudu.
But the implementation of these guidelines is completely uneven. It relies almost entirely on the personal discretion of individual school principals.
Which means if a principal is not culturally proactive, the students simply fall through the cracks of the secular system,
forcing them right back into that state of future we discussed earlier.
It is like trying to run two completely incompatible operating systems simultaneously on the same hard drive. You have the ancient, sun-bound astronomical clock of Sela running in the background against the relentless, manufactured secular corporate clock.
And when that operating system crashes in private, in the office stairwell or a cramped campus room, it eventually spills out into the highly public, legally contested spaces of the secular city.
And when private religious duty enters public, secular space, that friction turns into open and sometimes physical conflict.
Which brings us to the spatial politics of public prayer.
Yes, we're going to examine the events of Monday evening, February 9, 2026, at Sydney Town Hall Square. And to be incredibly clear to you listening, we are looking at this purely through the sociological and legal lens provided by our sources, without taking any sides on the underlying politics of the protest itself.
We are solely analyzing the mechanics of the clash.
Exactly. So during an authorized demonstration against the state visit of the Israeli president, a group of Muslim protesters, led by Sheikh Wissam Charkawi, initiated their Sunset Maghrib prayer directly in the square.
Simultaneously, New South Wales police moved in to enforce a dispersal order due to the dynamic nature of the crowd.
The result was police forcibly interrupting the prayer mid-act. The confrontation resulted in physical altercations, worshippers being thrown to the ground, and a massive political fallout demanding independent inquiries.
To understand why this specific incident sent such shockwaves through the community, we really have to frame it as a profound ontological collision.
An ontological clash.
Yes. An ontological clash occurs when two completely different realities, two fundamentally different ways of defining existence, authority, and priority, violently intersect in the same physical space.
So on one side, you have the secular operational reality of the police force and public commentators.
Right. From their framework, observing a group of protesters suddenly dropping to their knees in the middle of a tense dispersal order is interpreted as a performative political tactic.
They view it strictly as a maneuver designed to physically block law enforcement, control the optics of the situation, and delay operational procedures.
They are viewing the prayer purely through the lens of protest strategy.
Precisely. But on the other side, you have an absolute religious commitment grounded in Islamic jurisprudence.
Under Islamic law, the moment Salah is initiated, the worshipper enters a sacred, legally binding state of inviolability. They are communicating directly with the divine.
It is strictly forbidden to break or abandon the prayer once started, except in the case of a direct, life-threatening emergency.
Exactly. To be forcibly grabbed and dragged out of sujud by law enforcement is, from that ontological perspective, a profound spiritual violation. The secular state and the religious practitioner were operating in two entirely different realities that could not communicate with each other.
Hold on, though. Looking at the traditional rulings, doesn't initiating a prayer in the middle of a dynamic, highly volatile protest violate the spatial hierarchy of the religion to begin with?
That's a crucial point.
Because traditional Islamic jurisprudence dictates that prayer outside of a mosque must occur in a clean space and, crucially, must not block public paths or cause an obstruction to the thoroughfare.
It absolutely does, and that is a vital layer to this clash. By initiating the prayer in a major public thoroughfare during a highly charged demonstration, the traditional spatial guidelines were violated.
This action alienated the secular public.
Yes, who felt the shared civic space was being co-opted, and it forced a localized crisis. It exposed the raw, unresolved friction between state operational authority and the individual's absolute religious duty.
Neither the standard police protocols nor the traditional spatial guidelines of Islamic jurisprudence were fully prepared to navigate that specific, volatile intersection peacefully.
It is a devastatingly complex situation that perfectly encapsulates the ritual compliance gap at its most extreme.
So, what does this all mean for you, the educators, mentors, and administrators navigating these overlapping realities every day? If we synthesize the data we've covered, overcoming this gap requires massive systemic shifts on multiple fronts.
It requires pedagogical shifts in how the youth are taught.
Moving away from rote, mechanical memorization and embracing values-based tarbiyah that builds psychological resilience against the digital algorithms driving TASWIF.
It also demands proactive structural changes across society. For the diaspora, it means workplaces and educational institutions moving beyond passive legal compliance and actively embracing their positive duty.
It means providing clean prayer spaces and flexible scheduling that respects the astronomical clock just as much as the corporate clock.
And critically, as we saw on the streets of Sydney, it requires comprehensive cultural competency training for law enforcement regarding the temporal necessity and physical inviolability of Salah.
Ensuring that secular operational protocols do not result in violent ontological clashes. We have covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We've gone from the 80% non-compliance audits in Malaysia and the classical psychology of future to the biomechanics of knee pain, all the way to the stairwells, university campuses, and public squares of Australia.
It's a vast spectrum of friction.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go back to your communities. We live in a society completely dominated by the algorithmic ping of digital notifications, by highly flexible moral relativism, and by the relentless, unyielding demands of the 9-to-5 capitalist clock.
In an environment that constantly demands your attention, your labor, and your compromise, is the absolute non-negotiable temporal commitment of dropping to the floor for Salah, actually the ultimate modern act of rebellion.